Meeting today with Anna Atwood of Newcastle Mediation. And as is our normal practice, before we start, would you give them their contact information for those that would like to contact you for mediation services?
Sure. My name is Anna Atwood, and I have Newcastle Mediation as my company. And my phone number is 801-472-3380.
Now, as with everyone I speak with, we don't take a lot of time in advance. I don't give you questions in advance or things like that, and that's by design to make sure that you give us something candid. But we did chat a couple of minutes before we started today, and I thought it was kind of interesting. What is the approach you want to take today, or what do you want people to know about mediation when it comes to divorce or other kind of domestic relations situations where mediation is helpful? Because I thought you said some interesting and unique things.
You know, mediation for me has been quite a wonderful experience. One of the reasons is because mediation helps a lot of people that are in a conflict. So when you have a conflict in a marriage, you're automatically think that you have to go to court. And a lot of us don't know that mediation could be an incredible opportunity to end a relationship. It's always hard to end a relationship, but if you do it in an amicable way, it becomes a better experience than going to court. As it is, it's a hard experience, and it's really draining and stressful. Just thinking about going to court will make it even harder. And sometimes we don't really get what we would like to get out of our relationship and divorce, because we're caught in the timing and whatever the judge decides and whatever is going on, and trying to get what we want. In a mediation, on the other hand, it is an incredible way to sit down and just talk and see what is more important for each party, and realize that if there's children, you're going to see each other for a long time. And once you look for the best out of the relationship, at the same time helping the other party, because the other party is going to have the children for part of the time, that is going to be a much better relationship. And everybody wins on this. Nobody loses.
Let me just ask though, what about someone who comes to a mediation in bad faith, and or the other party comes to mediation unprepared or at a disadvantage from the beginning, either because that person is frightened of the other party, or not as well educated as the other party, or maybe plenty smart but doesn't know about the family finances and the extent of what's going to be divided? How do you deal with power imbalances that exist before you sit down in mediation? What do you think of that?
You know what I do, because I get those quite often, especially a wife that has been home for 25 years that doesn't know anything about finances, or anything about what's coming in the house, or what's, assets. What I do with couples like that is that I ask the person that does the finances in the house to educate us, to really help me understand how much he makes, how much he spends, and also to help her realize what's going on financially. And at the same time, she can make a more educated decision. And I do it in a way that is not hurtful to the person, and hopefully, usually as a man, that they don't feel that they have to disclose everything. But at the same time, I do ask for three months on their bank accounts and things like that. And so, in a way, I ask them so many little things that at the same time the other party gets a little glimpse and is not blinded to make a decision on that divorce.
How about situations where you've got one of the parties who just doesn't seem capable of making good decisions? Now, granted, you don't want to impose your values on someone else, but I'm talking about simple things like the stay-at-home mom of 25 years says, "Oh yeah, you can have custody of the kids." if you see things like that, how do you react as a mediator? What do you do?
You know, it is hard as a mediator because we are trained as mediators to be very neutral. And so once you're a neutral party, it's really hard to tell her, well, you should do this and you should do that. But at the same time, I like to do caucus. And I really like to sit down with that person and tell her exactly how things are gonna work in the future and help her realize, okay, would you like to do this, and do a reality check. And a lot of times those reality checks that I do with them, especially with the people that are in that situation, they understand it better and they get it. They really get it. If I just sit and explain. And sometimes it takes longer, maybe 2 or 3 calls, you know, and I just spend time with them. I don't charge on the phone calls because I think it is just my duty to do it. You know, it is the way I handle it.
So do you conduct mediations over the phone?
Sometimes I do, yes.
What do you prefer to have people do? Is there a major difference between doing something over the phone or over the internet as opposed to meeting in person?
Absolutely, meeting in person is probably the best thing for everybody because you can see their face, you can actually read the way that they're talking, what they're meaning. Over the phone is really hard to see if that's what they meant. But sometimes I have done it when they're in another state or they're in another country and they are traveling, and that's the only way that we can do it at that point, so we just have to do it.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the best circumstances, meeting in person and doing what have you, what does holding a mediation over the phone in general rank? Is that a 5 out of 10, a 7 out of 10, an 8?
I would say that doing it over the phone could be a 7 if it's really good. Sometimes it could be a 5 because people talk on top of each other and you don't get what you desire.
Do you find that when people are talking on the phone that they tend to be more disrespectful of each other because you're not all within just a few feet of each other, or?
Sometimes I think it could be the case, but I tell them that if there is some disrespect, we would have to end the mediation. I don't take it, and I don't think the other person should take it. But yes, it could be a little bit more disrespectful. It has that.
When we started out, you mentioned that a lot of people aren't aware of the options they have, and they think that going through a divorce means there must be involvement of court and going to court, and that they're relieved to realize that mediation's an alternative. Is that becoming more well known as it was than it was, say, a few years ago, or I don't know how soon? How long have you been doing mediations?
I've been doing it for about 4 years.
And in that 4-year time, have you seen people more aware of it as an option, or are they more or less still in the dark?
You know, I think there's a lot of people that have heard it from coworkers, and they have heard it from some other source, and they are a little bit more aware. But I think there's quite a bit of people, I would think a very, very large portion of our society, they think they just have to go to court and get a lawyer.
And is that changing with is that changing quickly, or is it more or less they still see that? They don't know about alternatives?
I think that is changing for very little.
Really?
Very little.
I'm surprised to hear that, but that's, you would know.
Yeah, I get a lot of people saying, oh, if I should have known this, I would have, say, 3 years of fighting with my husband. I get a lot of people that call from the beginning, but there's some, portion, probably about 50% of my clients, that they have been in battles and they don't settle for many years.
Take us through a description of how you like to run a mediation settlement conference. How do you like to start? Do you start with everybody in the same room? Do you give them a brief overview of the process? Do you ask them to hold hands or sing, or just what kinds of things do you like to do when you what's the word I'm looking for? When you run the meeting, what do you do?
The first thing I do is I really welcome them, and I really applaud that they're there at their own free will, because that's how mediation is you're there of your own free will. nobody's subpoenaing you, or nobody's asking you to be there. And then I let them know how mediation works, how it is gonna be an amicable way, and how we're gonna handle it, and how respect has to be very important, and also honesty. And so once they know what are my, how I run a mediation, I also let them know that they need to feel comfortable. And if they don't feel comfortable, to let me know. Because if they don't feel comfortable, we won't get where we wanna be. We want to be in a point that we can exchange words, and we can also resolve the conflict in a way that is good for both parties. And if there is if there is not a good feeling in it, I would like to get it out. And I really ask them, if they need to let it out, I ask them to do it right there.
Just to get things off their chest at the beginning?
Just to get there, yes. Or when it comes, when something comes, I ask them to absolutely get it out right there.
Does that consume a lot of time?
No, not really. I have found that as a mediator, I'm also a moderator.
Mhm.
And I also tell them, I'm gonna give you your time, and then I'm gonna give the time to the other party. And I absolutely, if you feel that you need to let it out, something that you just got in your heart and your chest, and you just wanna get it out right now, and I will let you know when we need to get going. And so they know in advance that, I'm gonna moderate that mediation to keep it going.
I would think people would appreciate that and that kind of sensitivity. My question though would be, and I'm not saying I know the answer to this question, but does it tend to get the mediation off on the wrong foot? Because people might get offended, or by getting things off their chest and venting, so to speak, does that now turn into now since we're being so frank with each other, let me tell you what I think of you and the horse you rode in on, or something like that? Does that break down, or how do you maintain order?
It has happened, and it will happen always, but because beforehand I told them that respect, and that they needed to contain themselves, to make sure that they respect the other person. I think that helps, even though they could be there could be some really bad words said. They know what we're there for, to solve a conflict. And so at the same time, they know what they're doing, and at the same time, I know what I need to do when I need to stop. And I said, it has gone a little bit too far. We probably need to have a few minutes. But I always keep the ball rolling, and I find that if they let it out, absolutely helps the mediation. Because sometimes when they don't let it out, there's something that happens later, and they're not happy. I want them happy when they come out of this
Mhm.
mediation. I don't want them to just go holding hands, of course, but I want them to say, it was worth it. It really was worth it.
And what percentage of the time do you see that happening?
Not be too sure, not to show off, but
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm not asking you to say, well, I'm so wonderful that but
I would say that I would say 80% of the couples that I work with, they come up to me and shake my hand before they leave, and they say, this is probably the best thing we have done in this divorce, to come and really get it out and talk about the conflict. And not always, but I would say 80%, and I like it. I think it's worth it. I've used mediation before I started to be a mediator, and I think that's why I'm doing it. It's just it gave me a peace of mind after I left it.
What's the average period of time? Knowing that it can be very short for some people, or rather long, all day. It can cover more than one day. But on average, how long does a successful mediation take?
I do my mediations for only 2 hours. I don't go for far more than 3. And the reason I do that, because sometimes that's enough to be talking, to doing numbers. Sometimes they wear out and we don't make good decisions. So I like them to really feel fresh and to make a good decision or a good choice in whatever they're choosing. And 3 hours, we call it good, and we come to another session. I find that that's probably the maximum in a mediation session. To do a divorce, you mean, or
Yeah.
to do a whole divorce?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, it depends how many years have they been married. It depends how amicable they are about things, how they have already divided. Some couples come already prepared with dividing all their assets, and, I mean, those could go really
Sure.
quick.
But on average, you're saying 2 to 3 hours at a time.
For a session, yes. And to finish a divorce, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 sessions when they're very amicable, and it could go up to 5 sessions if they're
Really?
really fighting about things and they don't agree, you know?
What percentage of couples do you think, or as you recall, bring lawyers with them, and how many come to mediation without lawyers and just work between them and with the mediator's help?
In my practice, I usually don't get a lot of lawyers. Usually, they just come pro se, and they call me and they say, you know, I don't have a lawyer, is that okay? Do I need one? And in all reality, I tell them, you know, you might need one, because there's things that I can't give you any information about because I'm not a lawyer. But in all reality, you can come and your spouse can come, and we can just do the 3 of us. Sometimes they bring a lawyer, and I would like both to bring a lawyer because then it's an even talk.
When people meet without lawyers, do they make an agreement they sign at the mediation when you're doing that, or do they make up an agreement afterward?
When they meet with me in mediation, I take notes, and I go and I type their memorandum of understanding, which is a document for mediation. And after I do that, and we check for that everything is exactly how they want it, they could go and sign it with a notary. They can actually go with a lawyer, so they can double check that paperwork and see if it's in their best interest.
Before they sign?
Before they sign. I tell them to do whatever they want with that piece of paper, but once it's signed, it's legally binding. And so whatever their needs are, whatever they want to do, whatever their income is, and if they can afford it, sometimes they can't afford it.
Do you have to be a family lawyer to be a mediator?
No,
Are you a family lawyer?
I am not a family
All right.
lawyer.
So that's something a lot of people may not be aware of, is that mediators can come from a variety of backgrounds.
Right.
And so, question I have for you is that where you make an agreement, how do people know if their agreement can even be enforced legally? What do you tell them so they can make sure their agreement won't run afoul of what the judge assigned to the case is going to say?
Well, I tell them that if they really agree each other with whatever I'm writing on that memorandum, that's the best agreement that it could be. I mean, what best agreement could be if they just do that and have it signed by a notary?
Let me give you an example of something that you probably have encountered, where a couple is willing to agree that one of the people won't pay any child support, 0, to the other parent that has custody of the kids or primary custody of the kids. What would you do in a situation like that? I mean, even though you're not an attorney, you're probably familiar with the fact that the court will probably not allow that.
Right.
Or something similar. Other kinds of agreements where the parties might be happy as clams to make that agreement, and one realizes, oh, I know I'm not getting any child support, but that's okay, I don't need it or I don't want it. But the court might not see it that way. There could be other situations with alimony or the division of debts or assets. What do you tell people to do? Do you just say, well, if it's your agreement, hope that the court will accept it, or do you give them any other advice?
Well, I always tell them, okay, go ahead.
And let me make sure, and I say advice, I don't mean legal advice, but just saying, hey folks, you may want to do something with this agreement before you sign it, or you may want it reviewed. Do you tell people that, or do you find that most people reach agreements that don't run afoul of the law?
Well, there's some people that don't want to deal with
Lawyers.
with lawyers. But I always tell them that I am there for the best interest of the children. And so I would like to have some child support in there. And so there's some couples that decide that there's not gonna be child support for whatever reason, there's no income, you know, they don't have any money. And I said, well, that is your agreement, but in the future, you probably need to come back to mediation or talk to ORS or somebody so that you can start getting child support. I mean, it's their choice, but at the same time, I advise them. And then sometimes there's other problems like abuse. And so in that case, I tell them to go ahead and check with a lawyer to help them. And then there's other problems that we talked about before where the wife doesn't feel that she knows everything about the finances.
Mhm.
And so I tell her to go to a CPA. I mean, there is a very specific person for everything instead of me trying to come up with the solutions or sending them to a lawyer to ask about a financial thing. I mean, everybody has their own specific thing, so I tell them to look at that.
Do a lot of people come to you with unrealistic expectations that you're supposed to help them reach agreement or give them legal advice or tell them, well, this is what I would do if I were in your shoes? Does that happen a lot in mediation?
Not a lot, but I have heard, some people want me to tell them exactly what to do, how to do it. And in all reality, I just tell them it is your choice. It is, I could tell you, well, that's probably not going to budge if you go to court. But I'm not a lawyer, so go ahead and let's do something that might go well if you go to court.
I appreciate the insight you brought here today, and before we end, is there anything else that comes to mind that you just think is a burning question that somebody might have that you want to answer?
Whoa, I think a lot of times I deal a lot with a foundation that helps women that have been abused, and that is probably the thing that really I have passion for, and I believe that women need to know that they can come and talk to a mediator. They can go to mediation and talk it over and try to make some peace with their couple, with their partner, and it's not necessarily really stressful for them.
Mm-hmm. And you said something, because we talked a little bit about that before we went on camera, where it may not be necessary or even wise to see that abusive partner punished, although that person could. And why do you say that? Because I think some people would be offended, or they might think that is unfair. If someone's abused, then that abuser deserves to be prosecuted and perhaps jailed or fined. And you've made some interesting comments about, it's like, well, you're not saying show too much leniency, but that mediation and working through those differences bring a certain benefit. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I thought it was bracing, first of all. I thought it was courageous of you to say, because it's not the most popular opinion, but as one who works with abused women, I thought it was interesting for you to bring that perspective.
And I totally understand women that go through an abuse, because sometimes the abuse that they go through is an amazing, terrible thing. I mean, it is. I've heard it all. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I just cringe, and I have cried over things that they tell me, because it is just so awful. It is awful, and I don't think it should be there, but it's there. It's already there. It's a reality. We have it in our society, and I think I'm not showing mercy in a mediation. When we do that, we're not showing a lot of sympathy, but we are showing understanding. And I think when a person that has problems with abuse, as an abuser, can have somebody that at least understands a little bit, that is not judging, is not there to judge that person, the results of that conflict are much better. Why? Because he's not at the defensive. He's there to say, okay, yes, I have my own faults. We all do. Sometimes we have them bigger than others. But once we talk and we just focus on the conflict, we see a better result. Then we start judging. Nobody likes to be judged, you know?
Do you find that abusive people reciprocate when they're given that opportunity, or do they more often than not just exploit it or take advantage of somebody's kindness and leniency and goodwill?
You know, they could be both. I think some could take advantage because they have done it for all their lives. They know how to do it. But if there's a person in the middle, like a mediator, to make sure that it doesn't go that route, it could be a very healing process and a really good solution for that conflict. I think it's an incredible way of doing it, and I've seen it.
Well, I think that's just, it's nice to see differing opinions. Whether they are right or wrong isn't the question, but it's nice to know that there are so many choices and different philosophies among mediators for people to find the right fit.
And you know what? I'm not saying that I can stop that person from being abusive, because some of those abusers are very, very smart. I mean, they
Right.
have it all.
But you're saying some understanding can be found, and it may be unwise to overlook it or just to assume that mediating and talking can't do any good. Give it a shot in more cases than some people would think.
Right. If you give it a shot, you might be surprised. I really think that you might be surprised, because even the person that is being abused many times is surprised. They get out of the mediation and they go, wow, I didn't think he was going to budge on that one.
As we wrap things up, do people call you, I assume that you speak Spanish, is that
Right,
correct?
right.
Fluently, is that correct?
Yes, I should.
Do you often have Spanish speaking couples seek you out?
Right, yes,
Okay,
they do.
that's-
I have about a 50-50
Really?
English and Spanish.
That's good to know. Well, again, thank you for coming.
Well,
It's been
thank
very,
you.
very enlightening and very much a pleasure. Before we go, though, one more time, please give them your name, the name of your practice, and your contact information for those that would like to. And make sure you say "Se habla español" at the end or something like that for the benefit of those people who only speak Spanish.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate this time with you. It's been a pleasure. My name is Anna Atwood. I own Newcastle Mediation. My phone number is 801-472-3380 y hablo español para los que necesiten hablar español en mediación. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.